I don't know about you guys, but I tend to spend the majority of the international breaks biting my fingernails and praying that all of our players come through their respective fixtures without any injury problems. On today's episode of the podcast, we're going to talk Trossard, we're going to talk KSE, we're going to talk Hincapie. We're also going to bring you some updates around the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. And as always, we will dip into the live chat. Welcome to the Chronicles of a Gooner. Thanks for being with us. Hey, everybody, how are we doing? Welcome back to another episode of the pod. Happy Friday to each and every one of you. It is an international break kind of Friday, which means there isn't a game to preview. There isn't a game to sink our teeth into, but there's plenty to talk about, as there always is in the Arsenal sphere and in the Arsenal world. As I said, on today's pod, we're going to talk a little bit about Piero Hincapie. We've had some further insight on Arsenal's latest signing from a journalist over at Sport Build, who's done a piece for the Arsenal website. I'll highlight to you guys some of the key points from it and key takeaways. I'll also link the article in the description below as well, so that you guys can go over and check it out should you so wish. We're also going to talk about reports coming out of Turkey linking Leandro Trossard with a move to Besiktas. Now, remember, the Turkish transfer window is not closed yet. It runs until the 12th of September. So if we are potentially looking at moving Leandro Trossard on, we could still see him go. We could still see him move to Turkish football between now and when their window closes. There's also the Saudi window that is open as well. So is there anything in that? Maybe we'll get into the Leandro Trossard stuff. We'll talk about his future and whether or not we should consider a sale if that is a possibility and if that interest does exist. We're also going to talk a little bit about KSE. There was a really interesting piece in The Athletic yesterday talking about KSE, how they've spent, what their involvement is, how far their involvement goes when it comes to sort of transfers, and also the fact that they are considering the multi-club ownership model. They're considering dipping into that. So we'll talk about it. I mean, I know they already own another club over in the MLS, but it's not operating in the way like Chelsea and Strasbourg operate, or Man City and Girona operate, etc., etc. So there's a lot to unpack there, and we'll get into all of that. Plus, I'm going to bring you an update on what's coming on Patreon, because we're bringing you some new features. Yes, it's taken me a little bit longer into the season to launch this stuff than I would have liked, but we are ready now, I believe, to do that. Obviously, a little bit of a delay when the baby came along and completely turned my sleeping routine upside down. But hey, we're back. We're in the swing of things. Really, really looking forward to it. And let's get into today's first topic then, shall we? Without further ado. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Piero Hincapie, because, of course, he was the latest of Arsenal's signings, a player that I think has been on Arsenal's radar for quite some time, but I never felt at any point prior to learning of Arsenal's, first approach, I guess. I never thought that we would sign this summer, if I'm being completely honest with you. You look at that left back / left centre back position. And obviously at the time, Jakub Kiwior was still an Arsenal player. So you looked at it and you went, well, it doesn't really feel like a priority. But Arsenal, it seems, kind of felt there was an opportunity there to upgrade on Kiwior, to bring someone in who would be willing to kind of fight for the role, who would bring a slightly different skill set, probably a little bit more, in fact, of what we've been looking for. I think with Jakub Kiwior, and we talked this to death, so I don't want to spend too much time kind of going over old ground, but I think with Jakub Kiwior, play him at left centre back and he was absolutely fine, particularly when you give him a run of games and he's able to find his rhythm. He was one of those players who was clearly much, much better off when he was playing regularly rather than coming in and out of a side, which can be difficult to do, as we know, okay? So he gets that run in the team at the back end of last season, does really, really well for me. But then we go into the summer, and I'd imagine that Jakub Kiwior, having had a taste of playing literally week in, week out, and not just because he was filling in at left back or something like that, probably felt like, you know what, look how much better I am when I play. Look how much more effective I am when I play regularly. I kind of need to speak to the manager here and have a little chat about what my future holds. Now, I don't know this for a fact, but I strongly suspect that Jakub Kiwior's move away from Arsenal was initiated by him. Now, I know there have been some reports saying that, or some quotes, sorry, I beg your pardon, from Jakub Kiwior himself, where he's talked about how it was quite difficult to say goodbye, how it all came about really, really quickly. The point I'm trying to make is I think Jakub Kiwior was open to the move away. I think those quotes that he sort of provided and have obviously gone around, yes, they do seem to indicate that the Porto move accelerated really, really quickly and maybe a bit quicker than Jakub Kiwior was expecting. But I do think the idea of him leaving is an idea that he probably led with. That's just my opinion. Arsenal have seen an opportunity to go out and get someone that I think they view as a better fit. Now, Kiwior as a left centre-back, as I've said, fine. Absolutely fine. Playing at left-back, I think he struggled. And I know he had one run in the team. I can't remember if it was last season or the season before last. It might have been the season before last, where he played at left-back for a bit. And he looked fairly solid and fairly strong. But he never gave us that ability to go into midfield. He didn't give us that ability to overlap. He basically gave us one half of what Mikel's looking for in his left backs. And his left backs play a very, very specific role, whether it's Miles Lewis-Skelly, whether it's Ricardo Calafiori, whether it was Alexander Zinchenko before them. They all played a very, very specific role, and they were required to provide something more than just what a conventional left back provides you with. And I thought when we asked Jakub Kiwior to do that, he struggled. As a centre-back, he's absolutely fine. But I think in Hincapie, Arsenal saw someone that they felt could come in and give us all of those things while potentially having a bigger upside to Jakub Kiwior. And obviously, that bigger upside and what Hincapie has achieved, which is winning the double unbeaten with Bayer Leverkusen, and his reputation meant that we had to pay more, right? That we let Jakub Kiwior go for a guaranteed fee down the line of something like 22 to 25 million euros. But we've had to spend way more than that to get Piero Hincapie in. It was an opportunity to upgrade, with half of that upgrade essentially being subsidized by moving Jakub Kiwior on, right? So we've done that. We've all sort of been trying to figure out exactly what it is about Piero Hincapie that attracted Arsenal to him. I think character-wise, you can see why. Passion-wise, he's got that real kind of South American drive, which I love. Reminds people a bit of Big Gabby, I'd imagine, in terms of the way he carries himself, the way he's super committed. And what I think has become apparent when looking into him in a bit more detail, certainly from my end, is that he will give us more as an attacker, and he will give us more in terms of what he can provide further up the pitch than Jakub Kiwior could. And I think that will be the main reason why Arsenal felt this was an upgrade and were happy to proceed with this. Now, Philip Ahrens of Sport Bild, he's been covering Bayer Leverkusen since 2008, very renowned and respected journalist over in Germany. He's provided some insight for Arsenal.com. Now, you can go over to Arsenal.com and you can find this article. And as I said, as soon as we finish up on the live, I'll link it below. But I just wanted to pick out a few of the key points and a few of the key comments. He says his name was known only at the start by experts of South American football, but it was clear that this was a typical Bayer Leverkusen move. They are very good at looking into the South American market. I remember them saying, we see very good things in him for the future, and all of these things were shown very, very quickly. He goes on to say that Piero is a really superb guy. He was very much respected by the fans here because he always left his heart on the pitch, which speaks to what I've just been saying. He talks about some of his physical attributes. He says he's very fast, very aggressive in a positive way. He can also play very offensively with good crosses and is very versatile. Now, that is the key, okay? The fact that he can get forward and support, the fact that he can get forward and impact games in the final third. That would have been the bit, as I keep explaining, that Jakub Kiwior, Arsenal probably felt was missing. Okay, so that's what he'll bring. Good deliveries into the box. You've got Victor Gyökeres up front now. So that's obviously very, very good. And his versatility. Versatility is something that I'd imagine if Mikel was to sit down and write a checklist in terms of what he wants from any prospective signing, I'd imagine that he puts versatility right at the top of that, because for a long, long time, that's clearly been one of his priorities. It's clearly been something that he looks for in a player. And obviously, Hincapie fits that bill. His flexibility makes him so good. Defenders on the left side are really hard to find. And even as a left back, or when you go on the wings, of course, he's not a winger naturally, but with Xavi Alonso, he's sometimes played a very offensive role, and he's very, very good with his head. So basically, building on that versatility point, but also highlighting that he's an absolute beast with his head from set pieces. Welcome to Set Piece FC, Piero Hincapie. He also goes on to say that Alonso was very happy with his development. He can play in a back three or a back four. He can play everything on the left side. Left-footed defenders are hard to find, and you will see some good crosses from him. Also, he then goes to talk about the number. I think, look, if you come in as a defender at a club like Arsenal and the number 5 is vacant, you want to take that number, don't you? Like, you want to take that number. It's a great number for a defender, but he just provides a little bit of insight and background as to why the number 5 is quite important to Piero Hincapie. He talks a lot about how he grew up very, very fond of the legend, because he wouldn't have remembered him playing, of course, Franz Beckenbauer, who was known as the Kaiser. And in Germany and in Ecuador, his nickname, Piero Hincapie's, is El Kaiser, because of that kind of admiration that he's had and spoken about in the past of Franz Beckenbauer, one of the great central defenders of the game. He also goes on to say, I think he'll be loved by the fans because he reminds me of an old English player in the 1980s. Aggressive, always there, always fair, and never losing the ball. So yeah, sounds like we're going to love him straight away. I think he's one of those players that you're just going to fall in love with in terms of his attitude and in terms of his, his sort of commitment, which, I don't doubt for a second. So that's a little bit of insight on Piero Hincapie. Remember, you can go and check out the full article on arsenal.com. Go and check it out. We're going to take a really short pause. When we come back, we're talking Leandro Trossard. Leandro Trossard, to sell or not to sell? That is the big question. Now, according to reports in Turkey, Besiktas have made an offer worth 22 million euros to Arsenal for Trossard. Their window, as I mentioned right at the top of the show, closes on September the 12th. So, what do we think about this? First of all, I would always advise that when a report comes out from the Turkish media about a potentially big name player making the move from the Premier League or any other top league to the Turkish league, you have to take it with a pinch of salt. Not because I'm discrediting this particular outlet or any one particular person, but I just feel like whenever there's a player linked with a move away from any club in the Premier League, we always hear of Besiktas, Fenerbahce, or Galatasaray. And so much of the time, those rumors never amount to anything. So I would approach this one with caution until someone maybe a little bit more credible in our eyes comes out and reports it. I'm going to take it with a pinch of salt. But it does raise an interesting question because there's a few factors here, right? First of all, Leandro Trossard only has a year to run on his contract. Now, we know that Arsenal have improved his terms. We think that that was something that was probably previously agreed and that Arsenal felt was required to be honoured. But there was no extension provided in terms of how long his stay will be at the football club, at least not to our knowledge. And so whatever the situation is, whether you've just provided someone with a salary bump or not, if someone comes into the final year of their contract and a substantial offer comes in, I think at the very least, you've got to consider it. And 22 million euros for a player like that has clearly fallen down the pecking order at Arsenal, I think is pretty good money. And so I think we've got to be open to doing this. Now, the fan in me says, what's the point? For 22 million quid or 22 million euros, which is probably like, 17 million pounds. Is it worth giving up an option that we have? Because as a fan, I don't really care for the finances. I don't really care for how we make the balance sheet look. I know people are obsessed at the moment with net spend and all the rest of it. And that would certainly help us in the net spend column. But I don't care about that. I care about the team being as best equipped as it can possibly be to go and challenge for the titles that we want to win and to be competitive where we need the team to be competitive, right? So that's where I'm at. I found it interesting because I was at the press conference ahead of the Liverpool game, and Mikel Arteta was asked a question about, who was missing and all the rest of it. And he mentioned a few names, like he said, like, we're without Kai, we're without Ben, we're without blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, then he said, Leo. And my ears kind of perked up at the time. And he was kind of caught on the way out of the room, Mikel, by a journalist who said, "You mentioned Leo there. Is he out?" And Arteta's response was kind of like very sharp, and he sort of walked out the door. But I remember coming out of that room and thinking, is that because Leandro Trossard is leaving? Is that because there is, to use a Fabrizio Romano phrase, concrete interest in the guy? Is that why he's not available for Liverpool? I don't know if he's going to play for Belgium. I think Belgium are due to play an international game tonight. And if he plays, then does that feed into the whole thing of, maybe he was okay for Anfield? I don't know. Like, honestly, I don't know. But that did raise suspicions with me. The fact that we hadn't heard of any injury or any problem or any issue for Leandro Trossard, and then all of a sudden he was missing and he was unavailable. Yeah, and you got that sense from being in the room at the time that the way Mikel dropped him into the list, it might have been inadvertent. I don't know. Like, it was just an opinion. But then I was driving home from London Colney and I was thinking, is that the end for Trossard at Arsenal? But then again, we've just given him these improved terms. And why would we do that? Why would we need to do that if, the idea is that he's going to leave? I don't know. So I'm kind of on the fence about how open Arsenal are to this. There's a part of me that thinks that if the right offer comes in, then yeah. And there's a part of me that goes down that road in terms of my thought process because of the suspicion that I kind of gained from being at that press conference and hearing what I heard on the day. It was reported instantly that, Trossard was a doubt for Anfield based on what Mikel had. But if you dive into it a little bit more, was that to do with his fitness, or was that to do with potentially something else? The answer is that we don't know. And I guess people will say, well, if that was the case, then surely he would have been gone by now. Like, if he was close to leaving last Friday, then by this Friday, surely we'd have a bit more clarity around that. So it can't be the case. But I always think that we're kind of a bit behind in terms of the news cycle. A lot of the time, we do learn things, we do hear things, but we hear them quite a bit after the fact. So, yeah, I'm not sure. But again, as I say, look, as a fan, I'm thinking keep him because we've got lots of games and the more options we have, the better. But from the player's perspective, will he want to stay if his role is significantly reduced, which I think it will be? Because if you think about it now, like, it's clear for a while that Mikel Arteta values what Martinelli brings to the table work rate-wise and tactically more than what Leandro Trossard does. It's why when they've both been fit and available, Martinelli's often had the upper hand. Trossard has felt like a bit of a super sub for Arsenal in recent seasons, and it's a role and a job that he's done brilliantly. And that is something that I'm fine with, and I'm sure he accepts to a point and to a degree. But you just look at the options we got now. I mean, Martinelli started away at Anfield. Madueke has got to be in the mix to play on that left-hand side because his performances have been quite encouraging so far. And then Eberechi Eze, who's come in since that Madueke signing, obviously will be looking to play on that left-hand side as well. And I'm sure we'll get plenty of minutes there. Then you factor in that we've got Nwaneri, we've got Dauman, we've got all these young players sort of coming through, knocking on the door. I don't really see where Trossard fits into the picture anymore. Now, there'll be a lot of people. For example, Damien Foster in the chat says, I'm sorry, but selling Trossard before Martinelli would be criminal. I think Trossard is far more effective in the final third these days. Okay. And I think that Trossard, is a much better finisher. He's an accomplished finisher. I've gone on record many, many times in recent seasons saying that if we had one chance in a game and I wanted it to fall to one player, it would be Leandro Trossard. So I'm not underplaying this guy's value or what he can bring to the table. But the other point to make sort of back at what Damien's saying is, Well, you can say that we should sell Martinelli before we should sell Trossard, but who's there interested? Because as far as we're aware, there's been no real solid interest in Gabriel Martinelli. What did we get at the start of the window? We got a load of Saudi Pro League chat. And we know that the vast majority of that is propaganda to try and prop up the reputation of the Saudi Pro League. We know that they're going out and briefing people and telling them, we're interested in this player and we're interested in that player, to try and make the league seem like a far more serious thing than it is. That's the truth. Okay, I'm not saying that the Saudi league is as bad as people make it out to be, because I don't think it can be, given the volume of quality footballers that have moved from Europe and from South America. Okay, mainly motivated by the financial rewards they stand to gain, but there is still a good level of player over there. So I'm not saying that that's the case, but this idea that, we should be selling Martinelli first, well, there isn't the interest. If there's interest in Trossard, who's in the final year of his contract, then I think as a football club, if you're being sensible, if you're doing sort of the right thing by the football club, and from a financial perspective, you have to consider this. But for me, I'll keep him. I would keep everyone that we have currently, because I think we've seen already how many injuries have we got in the first 3 weeks of the season. We've got to try and keep a hold of as many of these quality players as we can, because over the course of the season, I really do believe we're going to need them. Now, if the player is really pushing hard to leave, then that's a different story. But we don't know that that's the case. Leandro Trossard's just got really decent terms come through. He's in a position where he's quite happy probably to run the contract down, knowing that at the end of that period, he'll be able to command a big signing on fee and go somewhere else on a bumper deal. So being at Arsenal keeps you in the spotlight. It keeps you in the kind of sort of Premier League bubble for now. And having played that long in the Premier League, and if he's potentially a part of a championship winning squad, that will only increase his stake and mean that when he goes to negotiate for himself as a free agent in the summer, he's in a better position. So, yeah, let's see how that develops and how that all unfolds. Right, we're going to take a short pause. And then when we come back, we're going to talk KSE. As I mentioned, just to summarize on the Trossard thing, according to those reports, Besiktas have made an offer worth 22 million euros. We're yet to have that really confirmed. Their transfer window over in Turkey closes on September the 12th. So there's still time for this to be done, for this to go through. As a fan, I'd keep him. As a football club, I'd consider selling him. That's my take on it. Let me know your thoughts in the live chat. Short pause, and when we come back, we're talking KSE, we're talking Josh, and we're talking multi-club ownership.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner. Like and subscribe.
That's right. You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. Like and subscribe. It's really, really important that you do that. It doesn't take a second. Click like on the video, not in the chat box, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. If you're listening to us on Apple or Spotify, guys, please do leave us a review. All of that stuff really, really does help. Okay, let's go into the chat box before we move on to the KSE chat and take some of your questions and some of your thoughts around this. DJ Sooty highlighting what has been reported with regards to Martinelli over the course of the summer. He says that reports said that Arsenal valued Martinelli at about 60 million pounds, but interest was only around 40 million pounds. So we didn't sell. If true, then that was a bad call, as his value will only go down, in my opinion. See, I find that hard to believe. I find it, and again, I'm not sitting here trying to shit on anybody's reporting, but I find it really hard to believe that if a solid 40 million pound offer came in, having brought Madueke in, having brought, or at least been considering bringing in Ebereeze, having known that you were going to bolster sort of an offer, a bump to Leandro Trossard, I find it very difficult to believe that we would have just turned our noses up at 40 million pounds. We need to get better as a club at selling. There's no question about that. But I agree with you in that Martinelli's value is only going to decrease at this stage unless he can completely turn his form around. And listen, nobody in the world, I promise you, maybe apart from Martinelli, hopes that he turns his form around more than me, because I really like him. I really, really do. I've always liked him. I've always been drawn to Gabriel Martinelli for his passion, for how he plays the game, for the rawness and the way that he kind of, really hit the ground running actually when he came to England and took on a responsibility and did brilliantly. I'm rooting for him. I just can't see how he gets to that level where we're going to be satisfied as a title challenging, Champions League challenging side with his outputs. That's my worry. So I think if that money was there, we should have maybe considered that. The fact that it didn't happen probably tells me that interest was never ever really that solid. Like maybe people asked the question, maybe there was contact via intermediaries. Maybe there was what would you accept? And Arsenal went, well, we're looking for about 60 million. And that was the last phone call and there was no further contact made. Who knows? But I just think for me, again, Martinelli was always the one that you were potentially going to make money on. Trossard was never going to bring you money. It was always about, could you get yourself a relatively decent fee that might cover the wages of Eze's contract over the next few years or whatever. That's the way I looked at it throughout the summer. Android Mafia says the hate Martinelli is getting is unacceptable. How's that going to make him turn his form around? Mind your manners, everyone. Look, I agree with you that the hate has gone ridiculous and it's gone too far. But let me just explain my position on this, okay? I think it's absolutely fine to not be convinced that Gabriel Martinelli is good enough right now. That is absolutely fine. That is an opinion that every supporter on every corner of this planet is entitled to have, right? You pay your money, whether you're paying your money to go to the games, whether you're paying a subscription to watch the games, whether you're a member, whether you bought one bit of merchandise. As a paying fan, you are entitled absolutely to have your opinion on Gabriel Martinelli. I have an opinion on Gabriel Martinelli. I don't think currently he's performing at a level that is good enough. But when it spills into hate, that's when it's wrong, obviously. My problem here, and this is where we got to be careful, okay, is, and I feel like I've had some kind of like epiphany in the last 6 months or so. I've just come to realize that platforms like X, for example, okay, it's just full of nonsense a lot of the time. Like I will always keep X, okay, because for my work, I find it quite an important platform. And I think you get news really quickly, which is good. And you get different perspectives really quickly, and it's good. But I think you have to learn to be able to block out some of the noise. You have to learn to differentiate between what is the actual general opinion or consensus around something and what is just extreme noise on one side or the other. And you get this on everything, like on every topic, because it's not a football problem anymore. It's the way of the world. Okay, so you take some of the big news stories right now in the globe, okay, and you will go on X and you will see the two extremes, okay? You'll see one end of the spectrum, you'll see the other end of the spectrum. You very rarely get to see what's in between. So I always think that talking to people, listening to what you would consider to be balanced analysis from wherever that comes from, and what I think is balanced analysis might not be balanced analysis to someone else. I'm not judging people for listening to or watching any particular channel or platform, right? It's up to you. You go and watch and listen to what you think is best for you. But I think the only way that you really start to understand what the general consensus is essentially by talking to people, because what you get on social media is you get platforms that are geared to promoting what will generate the most engagement. And those extremes, they tend to generate the most engagement, whatever the opinion is, whatever the view is. So you got to get yourself in the headspace of, this is not just about Arsenal or football or Gabriel Martinelli, to be more specific. This is to do with the way the world is and the way people consume content now. And I've just switched off from so much of it, and I feel so much better for it. Like, I don't find myself getting wound up by things that I really, really strongly disagree with. Like, each to your own. I've made peace with it. People are entitled to have their opinions. If I'm allowed to have mine, why aren't they allowed to have theirs? They absolutely are. Fine. But I just am a little bit picky now about what I engage with and what I listen to and what I watch. And I think, if you watch the same stuff, in my opinion, what I believe to be the sane stuff and the calmer stuff, you're probably going to hear that people are looking at Martinelli and thinking he's not quite at the level he should be. But nobody's saying that he deserves hate, abuse, over the top criticism, etc., etc. So yeah, I think your point is right. The hate, it does get over the top and become ridiculous. But I think it's really important to highlight that that is not the general feeling of Arsenal fans. I don't think anyway. This is a good point from Steve. He says, unfortunately, many fans have a herd mentality. They're easily led. Yeah, and again, that speaks to the way of the world right now, as much as it does about the kind of footballing landscape. But anyway, we were supposed to talk about KSE, so let's do that now. I realized we've digressed a little bit. Let's get on to that right after this. Okay, so I wanted to do a little bit on KSE, Josh Kroenke specifically, and my kind of inspiration for this segment is that we've read a couple of really interesting articles about how the transfer window shaped up for Arsenal, and we've read one from The Athletic. I think it was yesterday, on Thursday, that talked quite a bit about the way they're running the club nowadays, and it got me thinking. So more than kind of reading key bits from the article to you and then discussing them, I kind of want to share my opinion and where I'm at with KSE right now, which has been shaped to a point by what we've heard, but more than that, the actions that we've seen in recent times. If you rewind back to last summer and you'd have asked me about KSE, I would have said, look, they've done a great job of putting the club back on the map. They've done a great job of investing to a point where this club can now be regular participants in the UEFA Champions League again. But my question was, in that summer where we signed Calafiori, Marino and Raya, before adding Sterling, Raya on a permanent. We'd already had him the season before, but we signed him on a permanent. I remember sitting there and going, like, that's all well and good. And I appreciate and I acknowledge that you spent a lot of money in recent years. But how far does your ambition actually go? Because that summer's business and the failure to bring in an attacker that summer, that said to me that we were happy or content with just competing. Competing was enough. Being in the Champions League was enough, because from a financial perspective, there's a balance to find, right? People think this is crazy. People always say, look, the more you win and the more successful you are on the pitch, the more money you generate as a football club and the better off you'll be. And to a point, that is true, but there's nuance to it. Think about it this way. Arsenal, I think, in the past have looked at it, and this was especially true in the Arsene Wenger days, and said, we're going to invest as much money as we need to invest to ensure that we get into the Champions League, because that is our biggest revenue source right now. That and the Premier League TV money. We're going to be in the Premier League. That's fine. Don't need to worry about that so much. But being in the Champions League, that's what's going to bring in the revenue that is going to allow us to come through a difficult financial period whereby we were paying off loans on the stadium and we had our hands tied behind our back. It was imperative that we made the Champions League, and Arsene Wenger at that time, for most of that period, was pulling that off. Okay. And my gripe with Arsenal at that point was always, well, you're happy to spend enough to get the team into the Champions League, but will you spend enough to take that next step? And I started to feel that way again last summer when we brought in, as I've mentioned, Raya, whose deal we turned into a permanent one, when we brought in Calafiori, Marino, and then we cheaped out on an attacker and brought in Raheem Sterling. Okay, that's the reality of it. That's how us as fans read that. The club would argue that they didn't find the right guy, therefore they didn't want to spend the money, blah, blah, blah. But to us, it felt like we cheaped out. So then you come into this summer and you've seen Arsenal fall short the season before, largely because the squad wasn't good enough, injuries, and all the other various reasons, decisions. We can talk about that till the cows come home. We've done it enough. I don't want to go over that again. But my point here is that I wanted to see Arsenal go, no, you know what? We're close. We're going to invest that bit more so that we can try and get over the line, and not to go, well, there is the risk that we invest that money and we still fall a point or two short and we end up having spent all of that money. But ultimately we would have been in the Champions League if we spent half of that money. I was wary and worried that we were slipping back into that mode of thinking as a football club. And then this summer, I think KSE laid down a marker. I think they've laid down a marker. And I think they deserve a lot of credit and a lot of praise. And This in itself shows you that I'm someone that is willing to criticize when I think that's right, but I'm also willing to hold my hands up and apologize and say I was wrong if I think I've got something wrong. Looking at that last summer, you know, I don't know what the answer is, okay? Because somebody would tell you that, well, actually, yeah, that was their thinking. It was like, well, we don't really need to invest that much to ensure that we're at least competitive and back in the Champions League. So maybe we'll be a bit more conservative. And some will say, well, they then watched what happened last year and have decided that, no, you know, we absolutely have to put this money in and we have to be this aggressive if we want to succeed. Ultimately, this summer, they've spent almost £250 million with next to nothing coming in, if we're being honest. Like, we've got a couple of loans done with options. We've got a couple of low value transfers that we've sort of managed to negotiate with regards to outgoings. We've barely bought anything in through the door. The one significant thing is the Kivior out for a 20 to 25 million euro fee, but that isn't going to come until 12 months down the line or whatever. And who knows what the structure looks like around that deal. So where you have to give KSE immense praise and immense credit is that they've gone and invested again without really seeing anything come back the other way. And this is where people keep banging on about net spend, net spend, net spend. And I actually think that while people are looking at these tables of net spend right now and using it as a bit of a stick to beat us with, I actually think if you look at our net spend and look at how little we've brought in versus what we've paid out, I think if anything, that should give you encouragement and belief in the fact that actually, you know what, KSE, they do want to win and they do want to succeed, because everybody else seems to be bothered about net spend. Guess what? They don't seem to be that fussed because they're still going out and investing in players. They still brought in players beyond what we thought was realistic in terms of the way that as the window went on, they then went and got Ebere Eze the way they did. And then, you know, as I would have argued at that point that we needed Ebere Eze and we were still one short. But then they go and get Hincapie. You know, it would have been very easy to say, no, you know what, Jakub Kivior's fine, let's keep him. And we'll sort of work with him. But no, they went and put another amount of money on top of what they were getting for Kivior, probably doubled it, to go and get Hincapie in. So I think it's really, really difficult to question the ambition at the moment. And in this recent piece that The Athletic put out, they highlight that since the 18-19 season, as a club, we're kind of over the £1.4 billion mark in terms of what we've spent. And I think the fact that, as I keep saying, that the net spend amount looks the way it does and that we've brought in so little in terms of incoming fees, I think that makes what KSE have done all the more impressive. So I want to give them their flowers for that. I think if you go back to where things started to change, you've got to look back at the Super League stuff and the subsequent We Care Do You campaign that followed that. I don't think We Care Do You had the same impact as much impact as was the hope at the time. It was put together by a group of people that had all the best intentions. I was involved in some of the early conversations around it on WhatsApp. I spoke about it on the radio to get the message out there at the time because I really did believe in it. And I think for whatever reason, and only the people that were really at the heart of it understand, that did lose momentum and it seemed to dissolve and fade away. But what it did, if nothing else, was give KSE and Josh in particular, I think, a massive kick up the arse to say, this is a massive bloody football club, okay? This is a huge football club that means so much to so many people. This club is a behemoth of the footballing world. And you need to be more present. You need to be more connected with the people that are the heart and the beating heart of this football club. You have to. And since then, there's been a noticeable shift. Now, obviously, people would argue that that shift has coincided with KSE taking full control of the club. And to a point and to a degree, I think that's true as well. But I think the We Care Do You thing, whether it's still going or not, it succeeded in giving those people right at the top of Arsenal Football Club, the ownership I'm talking about, the kick up the arse that they needed. And since then, things have been a lot better. There's a couple of interesting nuggets from this Athletic piece. So they do highlight that when it comes to pursuing targets, neither Stan or Josh get involved. They have a view on the profile of players that Arsenal should be targeting. They like young players with plenty of upside, as all business people would. And they want to understand decisions before signing off on them. But ultimately, it sounds like they've got quite a bit of faith in the people that are running the show at the moment. Richard Garlick, his appointment was very much, overseen by Josh Kroenke, so he's got confidence in that. You've got Mikel Arteta, who they clearly trust very, very well. Tim Lewis is someone that KSE have trusted for a long, long time. That's obviously someone that KSE are comfortable to allow to kind of do what he does, and that's worked quite well in terms of the way that we're going out and identifying players and getting players in through the door. There is a bit in there about multi-club ownership. Obviously, they have the Colorado Rapids. Not sure how closely we currently work with the Colorado Rapids, if at all. But I think they're considering maybe going out and getting another club, maybe in the European footballing sphere, that they can operate as a part of this multi-club ownership model. So many other sort of big investors in the game have taken this up recently. The horse is already bolted in terms of, whether you can allow it or should allow it or not. I personally don't like it. I think it's crap. I hate the fact that someone can have multiple interests in the same sport. I don't like it. I think that, clubs use it to get around certain things. I think clubs use it to, to good effect in terms of sending players out on loan, maybe to the smaller club, with all due respect of that multi-club ownership, building them up, and then, having people on their books without necessarily having them as part of their main focus. But the problem is that there'll always be a club in a multi-club ownership whose supporters feel like they're not the priority. And that is the main crux of why I'm against it. But it is something that's very prevalent in the modern game. And I would not be surprised if KSE were to get a little bit more involved in that type of thing, either by increasing our ties and connection with the Colorado Rapids, or going and purchasing another club in Europe. I don't think we really benefit from having a link to an MLS club, with all due respect to the MLS, as much as we would with a club in one of Europe's better leagues. Does that make sense? So I don't really see the need to be that linked with the Rapids, and I understand why. For that reason, you've probably, not seen a great deal of collaboration between the two. But yeah, KSE seem to be open to it, as they should be, because that's what the times are sort of filled with at the moment. And they're going to look at their peers, they're going to look at other successful investors in the game, and they're going to want to mirror that approach if they think it's going to bring reward and high value. Yeah, that's kind of it. I just wanted to say, like, for me, everybody keeps talking about net spend, but the net spend and how the two columns look versus kind of money in versus money out, I think all that does is just increase the applause and increase the admiration that I have for what KSE have done recently. So yeah. Some of you pointing out a post that I should read. Oh, right. I guess someone's posted, Gunner Blog has tweeted out about Martinelli. He just tweeted out a piece in which he talks about a stylistic shift in the team, the players, maybe personal struggle for confidence, and the Anfield moment that became a meme. I'll have a read of that, and maybe we'll discuss it in a bit more detail on an upcoming show. Before I let you guys go, I just want to touch on a couple of bits and pieces that we're going to be bringing to the Chronicles of a Gooner, mainly over on Patreon, but some on the main feed as well. So we're going to start doing some written pieces. I realized that a lot of you really enjoy the player rating stuff that we were doing on Patreon last season, but the kind of logistics of recording that in a voice or video format straight after a game, when I'm at a game, covering a game, is quite difficult. So what I'm going to endeavor to do is to put out my player ratings on the day/evening of a game. But we're going to do that in written format over on Patreon. Now, that'll be available to everybody. So what I would say is, we've got our Patreon members that are paid members, and those guys get access to extra content, video content, after every Premier League game. They also get access to every episode of the podcast completely ad-free, because I realized that when you listen to the Chronicles of a Gooner on Apple or Spotify now, there's quite a few ads. We've got to do it to keep the lights on at sort of TCOAG HQ. But for me, I understand that a lot of people would prefer to get around those. And a great way of doing that is by becoming a patron. So you're also supporting the podcast and getting a better listener experience. So the link for our Patreon page is in the description below. But what I will say is, lots of people are signed up as paid members. Yes. Lots of you are signed up as free members too. I would love you to sign up as free members, because at least that way I can share stuff with you, a more concentrated and condensed community, like my player ratings, which will be public in that you can access them without paying. But I'm going to make it for free members, basically. So sign up and give your details and become a member, because then at least that way we've built a kind of little community that is fenced off, if you like. So we're not getting the crap that we sometimes experience on social media when trying to have sensible Arsenal conversations. So sign up for free. I'd really, really appreciate that. And you'd get access to my player ratings, as well as a couple of other bits. Like, I'm hoping to do the odd blog from time to time. I have missed writing about football. That was what I kind of first started out doing. And then it kind of changed and snowballed and became more of a broadcasting career, which I love, by the way. I'm not knocking it. But I do miss writing the odd blog from time to time. So you'll be able to check those out. Again, they'll be accessible to free Patreon members. Our paid members are still the only ones that are going to get access to the ad-free feed and the additional video content. But go over and sign up for free, and we'll keep you across what's going on the paid side. You'll get all the stuff on the free side. And if you ever want to make that switch over because you feel like it's worthwhile doing because you're enjoying the content and you want to support it, then you can do that. But that is completely, of course, up to you. We're also going to do something that we kicked off a little bit last season, but never really were able to follow through on just because I got so busy, where it was kind of like, some people said it should be called Symeou Says, others said it should be called Harry Reacts. And basically, I'm going to be putting out a very short piece a little bit later on today, talking about the exit of Spurs chairman Daniel Levy, because I think that's really, really big news in the Premier League world. And I want to share some thoughts on that. And I want to share some views on that. I realize this is an Arsenal podcast, but from time to time, when there's a big story, we're going to cover it. And that's a part of the mission to make the Chronicles of a Gooner a kind of more all-encompassing platform. So, yeah, I work in football now full time. I like to think that I can provide a bit more context, maybe around some stories, a bit more analysis, insight, where I have it. So where I feel that I can do that, I'll provide bits of content on different stories. And we're going to bring you that Daniel Levy bit a little bit later on in the day. So keep your eyes out for that. Again, go over to Patreon, check us out, sign up if you want to sign up as a paid member, sign up for free if you want, just to get a feel for what we're doing. And I'll see you all very, very soon. Remember, don't forget to leave a like on the video here if you're watching us on YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to leave us a review if you're listening on Apple, and all the rest of it. And I'll catch you all on the next one. Until then, take care of yourselves and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Up the Arsenal. Goodbye.